Hi, it's spring 2024. It's April and lots of things are starting to flower, so I'm going to take you on a tour of the garden, show and tell you about everything. Here we have three sour cherries. They're morello and they're just starting to flower, and they're up against a windbreak wall I made and a woodshed I made. I'll take you to the front of the house. Here against this wall, which is roughly south facing, I have two white grapes. They're Vogue Vanderlaan, and they should be okay outdoors in Ireland. Here we have a bunch of gooseberries and currants that are in flower. I've lost track of what varieties they are. This is a black currant, you can see them forming. This is a red currant still flowering. And this is a Worcesterberry, which is a cross between the two. We have some raised beds that are still just in use from winter. We have some carrots and mustard greens in there, but it's mostly overgrown. Here we have some perennial kale. They're about 4 years old now, and they just keep coming back. They're kind of multi-headed, if you can see. We have some dwarfing apples up against the fence. This is Rainette Demands. It's not going to leaf out or flower for quite a while yet. This is Bardsey. It was found on an island, windswept island, and is very disease resistant and hardy. And this is a local traditional apple. It tastes like bananas, apparently, because it has all the sweet profile but no sour. And that is called Ardcaden Russet. We have some more raised beds. They're currently full of garlic. And against the hedgerow, lots of bluebells out right now. We have a big raised bed here that's been planted out for spuds this year, but they haven't shown their head yet. So I've got two varieties of early and one main crop here. So there's old oak that was here in the hedgerow, and I found a lot of wild garlic in a nearby riverbank. I've planted all of that out and it's flowering well. I transplanted quite a bit. I hope it can get established there. Here we have a hybrid between rowan and aronia, and it's supposed to have a lot of edible berries on it. In this kind of shady spot, I've just mulched this out recently. It's another big set of gooseberries and currants. And we also have hazel over here. This is Webb's Prize Cob with big edible nuts. And we have some more hazels over here. These are basically just meant to fill out the hedgerow a bit more, to give more shelter for the fruit trees. Here we have another morello sour cherry. It's a shady spot in this corner, so they do very well with shade. You can see it's covered in flowers right now. Here is what's supposed to be a cooking apple called Grenadier, but I think it was mislabeled. It doesn't match on flowering time or appearance, so that's a bit of a mystery, that one. We have a plum here called Opal, quite a nice dessert plum, and it's just had its first couple of flowers this year, so we might not get much on that. This is Pitmaston pineapple. You can see it's still dormant. An apple. Here's a gumi called Uros Hyreo Varalova. That's what the breeder labeled it as, but I can't find any more information about it. And you can see it is not really even leafed out or flowering yet. Just quite unusual for a gumi. That should be going already. Here we have another apple called Rainette de Amboon, and it's just starting to flower now. It's an eater, a French apple. This is another native Irish apple called Mrs. Perry. It's a really productive and really nice dessert apple, a summer apple, so it won't store, but it's very delicious, quite a juicy one. Here we have a dwarf pear. It is a conference, I think. And we've got a little thing coming right from the graft union. It doesn't quite look like quince and doesn't quite look like pear. Very different leaves to the graft on top. So it's a bit of a mystery still. I'm hoping that might be like a hybrid coming out of the graft union, but that's pretty rare. This is a native Irish apple again, and it's called April Queen. It's very late to leaf out. I'm quite interested in apples like that because they miss the late frost, so I'm trying to collect them. You'll see several more. This is a quince. It's actually from a rootstock sucker. It's Quince A, E-line. It's supposed to be very hardy, but it's a rootstock. So I'm curious what the fruit are like on that one. Here is an apple that I grafted from a very interesting roadside apple, a feral apple, from the nearby town. And I've been watching it and riding out on my bike to see it, tasting the fruit. And I grafted this about 2 years ago, and it's going to flower for the first time. So I can compare the fruit from this on a dwarf rootstock to the parent, which is a little bit kind of quite an old tree by now, so it's struggling a little bit. This is a little fig called Little Miss Figgy. We'll see how that does outdoors. And here is a single rootstock that's forked, and I've put two of seedling apples that I planted last year. They're from Bardsey. So Bardsey has some interesting disease resistance properties, so we're going to see how that breeds out. And it's a summer apple and eating apple, so it could be interesting. This is another of the late flowering apples, a French one. This is Rainet Amérique. It's from Brittany, so similar weather, and that's going to be an interesting one. Let's go into the tunnel. This tunnel I made myself. It's kind of used high density pipes over a wooden frame. So it was a very cheap way to do a big tunnel. This is like 3 meters by 11. And all in with the plastic and everything, it was built for about 500 euros. So there's a lot of onions in here right now. A few potatoes. This is a persimmon tree. So this is a hybrid. It's Nikita's Gift crossed with Taishu. So that's a very interesting one when that flowers. But I don't think it's going to flower yet this year. That's maybe third or fourth leaf. And we have a grape in here, Black Hamburg. And it gets a little bit of mold when the bunches are really big. But we'll see what I can do about that. They're quite tasty tasty grapes. So there's the tunnel, and it's hot in here today. I just put the raised beds in this winter, and it has helped a real lot with keeping everything weighted and so on. It used to just be mounded up soil before that. So back to the orchard. This is a pear called Invincible or Delwino. It'll flower twice. So if a late frost hits it, it will have another go at flowering, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. So apparently both flushes can ripen at different times, and the pears from each flush has different kind of properties. So that's an interesting one. It's on Quince A-line rootstock, so dwarfing, quite dwarfing. That's the one that I had over behind the tunnel. And you can tell it doesn't really branch all that much. This has probably third or fourth leaf as well. And the branches are very slow to form, but it forms a massive amount of fruit buds. Here is another apple just starting to flower. This is Cornish aromatic. I tasted it last year. It's not too tasty, to be honest, but that was the first year, so maybe it will improve as it matures. This is Old Green Gage, a lovely old plum. Gage type plum, supposed to be very syrupy and sweet and very tricky to grow. So I haven't done really any training on this. This is just its natural form. Beautiful strong tree. One of my thicker trunks of all. But it still hasn't flowered yet, so it doesn't look like it's going to flower this year either. Here is another apple. Still hasn't flowered or leafed. That's what I like. And this is called Crawley Beauty. It's a cooking apple. It takes forever to flower. It could be end of May before it does. So that's what I'm interested in. Here is another gumi. You can see I placed them kind of in the middle of the apple plantings because it's a nitrogen fixer, Eleagnus. And you can see it's covered in flowers, these little kind of trumpet-shaped yellow flowers. It's buried in them this year. So it hasn't fruited that much in previous years, but I trimmed it into a better shape over winter, and I'm hoping it's going to put out a lot of fruit this year. This is my favorite apple. This is called Pendu Plat, and it's very famous as a late flowering apple. This is kind of the centerpiece of my late flowering breeding project. So the ones I've shown you so far that I mentioned were late flowering. They're all cross-pollinating. Nothing else has any flowers out at the time these do. It's often 4 or 5 weeks later than other apples. So I can just keep the apples off them and germinate them and do a little breeding project. That's going to be a little hobby project in the background. Here is a pear. It's a really nice pear. It's got a kind of drooping habit. And, God, what's this one called again? I'm going to have to come back to that one. Oh, it's Durandot. It's a French pear, and it's supposed to be very disease resistant. It's just got a really nice form, and it seems quite bulletproof. The other pears seem kind of fussy in my conditions. So that's got quite a few flowers on it this year for the first time. That looks like it's going to have quite a few pears to try. Into the back section here. This is a plum. It's always very late to leaf. It's kind of beaten up. It's got some wounds, I think from sun scald and so on. And because it takes forever to leaf out. This is called Marjorie's seedling. It's supposed to be a dual purpose cooker and eater, and supposed to be quite good for disease resistance. So that looks like it's a long way off leafing out yet. Here's another apple. I'm really not sure about this one. It's called Irish Russet or Sam Young. And it's kind of fruit that is known to split. Every apple will split and then kind of form a scar as it heals, but it's supposed to be delicious. So it's getting its last chance this year. Last year they all split and just rotted. So we'll see how it does, and I've got a replacement ready to jump into its grave. So if it doesn't shape up this year, I'm just going to trim off the everything else and keep this one graft here. God, this camera doesn't want to focus. Here's my little pond. We've got some water plants here featuring water mint, which is very, very aromatic and delicious. I transplanted that from a local river. I think this one's called marsh marigold. And it's normally covered in pollinators, which is great. And I don't really I don't have a filter or anything for the pond, just a little bubbler, so it's pretty manky. This is a Saskatoon. It's doing very well this year, lots and lots of flowers. This is Smoky, one of the most famous, supposedly best tasting ones, self-fertile. That's the only one I have. Here is the chicken coop. Kind of designed this. It's got the poop board up the top where they roost, so very easy to clean, and the nesting boxes down here. Right now I've just got 2 chickens. They're having a nice day in the sun now. Give them some seeds. There he goes. They've got quite a lot of space. I had 3, one died last year, so I've got about 100 meters squared there, I think, between them. Now, I did all this these paths myself. That was one of the first things I did when I was planting the orchard. And I shuttered all these curbs as well myself. That was fun. Lots of work. Here is a medlar, just starting to leaf out. This is Nottingham. Not too keen on medlars. I was excited by them because they're old and interesting. But, it's kind of like half moldy when you're eating it. You need to wait for them to blet, so they're very mushy. But I saw somebody making jam from it, describing it as delicious, so it's still there. It's kind of relegated to the hedgerow, and we'll try jam. These were some autumn olives that I grafted over to Gumi. The autumn olives got huge, and they're mainly here for nitrogen fixing for a black mulberry here. So that's probably up to about 5 or 6 foot now. I'd say that's the very first tree that got put in here. So that's 4th leaf now. And it could be another good few years before it flowers. This is a very interesting apple, a relative of an apple called the Kazakh apple, Malus sieversii. And it's kind of the wild crab apple that every eating apple descended from. It's very interesting. I could rant about that forever, but look it up. They're really cool. I've got one there and a couple more over here I'll show in a second. This is another medlar. Oh, it's starting to flower. Just starting to form flower buds. And this one is called Westerveld. And it's a nice big tree. This one is on hawthorn rootstock. It's thriving very well. I also relegated this to the hedgerow when I tasted my first medlar. Let's not backlight this. Here, I've given this a lot of space to itself. Here's a sweet chestnut. It's called Marigold, and it's been producing burrs for like the last 3 years, but they haven't filled out, so they just kind of have slivers of nuts inside. So I've grafted a local variety that has fairly large fruit onto a few branches on the windward side, so they might help with wind-borne pollination, and if not, they'll give a few of their own nuts. In this back corner, here's 2 more Kazakh apples. They're from a different nursery, so the first one was from a German nursery and these are from a Polish nursery. So if I want to play around with breeding with them, I've got 2 different sources of genetics there, but I think these 2 are clones of each other. Here's just a local crabapple, Malus sylvestris, that I've found with a really beautiful shape in the local woods, and I just transplanted it here. Here is a pear. It's invincible as well. Same breed as the dwarfing one I showed before, but it wasn't really doing much. It was barely putting on growth, so I buried it way below, maybe a foot below, above the graft union. I think it's putting out its own roots, and last year it put on a massive amount of growth on its own roots. This is also a very wet corner, so I think it was quite dry in previous years, so this will help it as well. And here we have lots of rootstocks for my grafting experiments. These are all M9 apples. We have some grafts this year. This is a sweet cherry, Cherry Stella. It's putting on fruit for the first time. Get some nice, 2 or 3 sweet cherries this year, or more accurately the birds will, but they'll be pretty until then. And this is a damson, kind of wild native plum. Good for wine apparently, good for jams and stuff like that. So it's very bushy and I need to prune this, but I'm waiting till midsummer here because it's still very, very wet. Over inside the chicken pen, we have another interesting fresh French apple called a moor, and this was one of the most tasty apples that I've eaten yet, that I have here. Very aromatic, kind of elderberry taste, elderflower kind of aroma to it. Very delicious. So I kept some seeds off that. I've got some seedlings from that apple, and it's stored all the way to like February, March. It was still almost rock hard, and I think it's a very late storing apple. Here is a weeping white mulberry, and it got kind of beat up in the winds. We'll see if it fills out. There it goes. And that's almost everything. We have one last, I've got everything kind of divided into quadrants with the paths, so that other than the middle plantings, there's kind of a path adjacent to every tree. So this is the last section, the other side of the fence from the start of the video. So here's another apple, very late to leaf out. So like I said, we're already into April. This one hasn't even started to bud. It's a native Irish apple called Appletown Wonder, and it's supposed to be huge, get up to 500 gram apples or something. So very excited to try that. I think it's got some fruit buds for the first time this year, so I'll probably get to taste that. Here's a big quince. Beautiful tree. It's got a couple of little flowers starting. Lovely tree. Quinces seem to do really well on my soil, which I think is a little bit alkaline apparently. Here's another pear. This is called Emile de Haste, a Belgian pear I think. It's got some flowers on it. It's a little bit beaten up. There was a really strong storm recently and got up to 100 km/h winds. So this place can be a bit of a wind tunnel. That's why I built that wind blocking fence. This is a cooking apple, and it's really productive. You can see it's got a kind of a horizontal habit, and it just weighs itself down. The name escapes me, but it'll come back to me. It's some kind of royal name, so I won't say it too loud. Here is a plum, a Mirabelle, and it really got beat up with the wind. It had a lot of leaves out already, and they got kind of wind damaged, battered around. It was seriously strong winds. You can actually see a bit of my roof that fell off over there to the right of those trees. And this one hasn't fruited yet either. Don't think it's going to this year. Here's another sour cherry, Morello, probably one of, what's that now? I've got 5 I think. And they'll probably need netting to collect a lot of cherries off them if I'm going to fight off the birds. But they're just kind of bulletproof in our climate, and I like sour cherries. This is the last one of the late flowering apples. This is called Belfield de Salines, and it's the most exciting from its description. That's definitely going to be end of May before that pushes a leaf. I've just cut it for the first time, so it should put out some scaffolds from about waist height. And the blue rings. They're just blue barrels that I've cut into pieces. Instead, the first few years I had all the trees mulched all around, and it's just too much weeding for me to keep the mulch rings from getting devoured by the grass. So I get a lot of wildflowers here. There's spotted orchids and things. There's not much coming up yet, just a few dead nettles and dandelions and so on. But this will be buried in wildflowers. So that's my approach now. I put in all the curbing and all these kind of barriers around the trees. They've got some weed fabric inside that also helps keep the crown of the roots a little bit drier than the surrounding soil, which can be quite heavy in clay. And so there's a little bit of a divider between what's going to be quite tall grass and wildflowers and the trees and the walking paths and so on. So that's the approach. That's about everything. Here's my little table I made myself. And that's it. Thanks a lot.